truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Tuesday, March 26th, 2024, the 1161st day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast on the day of its release. The only way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will be supporting me, the work I do, and this show as it expands. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free a couple days later on a wide variety of podcast platforms and, of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. All right, so I guess we are in the weirdest possible timeline that any of us could have ever imagined. Each day we get a story that is just so over the top in numerous ways, the sorts of things that would have dominated news cycles for a month or longer. And now we're getting one every day, sometimes multiple stories like that every day. And what are we to make of that? Well, we can say that the world is a crazy place. All sorts of crazy things happen. Maybe we just get more information now. And it's not better information. We just get more of it. So the volume of crazy stories has increased, which makes us think, oh man, the world is becoming a crazier place. And it's all just an illusion. Maybe we live in the same sort of world we always lived in. Maybe this many crazy things always happened and we just weren't aware of them because of the information flow or because of what our attention gravitated to or the fact that our attention could be manipulated and redirected at all times. And on some level, it still can be, certainly. But we are getting not only a number of major stories that seem totally extraordinary, they also come attached to major mysteries. We don't have the authoritative source to tell us what happened and what to think now. We go through every detail we can find on our own, and we're not always able to reach firm conclusions on anything that's happening. And that includes not even being 100% sure that much of it is happening in the first place. I woke up this morning expecting to spend much of the episode on the events over the weekend in Russia, where they were the victims seemingly of a terrorist incident on Friday, how they identified subjects, how they tracked those subjects down, and some of the response. And we definitely will get into that. But just since then, just in the time since I put the podcast up yesterday, we have had an O.J. Simpson style getaway, but this time in a G5 by the rapper Sean Combs, also known as Puff Daddy, also known as Puffy, also known as P. Diddy, also known as Diddy, and he's got some other names too. They're all equally ridiculous. But his house was raided. They seem to be going after him for something related to sex trafficking. There have been accusations leveled in the past, a lawsuit filed accusing Diddy and others. But there are no firm answers there yet. I mean, I guess we can go through every minor detail of the story as it's been reported to us. But are we expecting that those details will remain in place and stand the test of time, as if the initial round of reporting actually came through to us clear and honest? Let's memorize everything about this, assuming that it's all factual. And that's a massive developing story. Obviously, Sean Combs, Diddy, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, whatever. He has been a huge star in the hip hop and pop music industry now for 30 years. He's tied into all sorts of power players. He's brought up all sorts of young artists. He's been looked at and branded as, at various times over his career, a hero for being able to do that. He spots this young talent. He gives people these careers. He launches people on their trajectory. And when you have that sort of power in the entertainment industry, then you are tied into a lot of people. He's also tied in with politics. And if the sex trafficking claims pan out, if they are what people believe them to be, then we can expect that that'll be a big and ongoing storyline. Now, does that mean we're actually going to get to the people connected to him, or is he just going to be a sacrifice in order to preserve the rest? We still don't have the client lists from Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell. And again, we're still within 24 hours of this story even coming out. So it's best to hold off making any major assumptions about where it's headed. Whenever you see all brands of the mainstream media instantly latch on to a story and pitch a similar narrative and cover all of the events in the exact same way, as if this is just a random occurrence in the world that they are just finding out about in real time and reporting on truthfully, I never suspect that'll be the case. So it's always wise to wait. And then over the course of the night, we had another major incident with the container ship, the Dali, slamming into a bridge support of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore and seeming to cause the collapse of that bridge. It's hard to know what to make of these stories. Are they all noise? Are they all signal? Is there some signal and some noise? That's usually the case. But we're certainly not going to reach any conclusions at this point. And when that's the information landscape you're dealing with, the best way to see things is just information among other information. I'm going to take in all that information, all these different viewpoints. I'll listen to your conspiracy theories. Someone's going to call you crazy. All good. I want to hear it. I want to hear people's honest reactions to what they are seeing and reading and hearing all the time. Just want your honest reactions. I want to know what you think is going on. Because if I don't consider the possibility, then I may well miss the right answer just because it hasn't even occurred to me that it could be something other than the set of possibilities I'm already dealing with. And I'm not going to be able to generate all those possibilities on my own. So I want to hear what people think. You're going to tell me you think that the bridge was laid with explosives? I will listen to you because I don't know. Could that be possible? Sure, it could. Do we live in a world where stuff like that happens? Yes, we do. You want to tell me you think that that's crazy and there's no evidence, but that you believe that the ship and its systems were cyber attacked and it was redirected toward that support for the bridge? I'll listen to that too. I will listen to all of it because I want to know every one of those possibilities so that I can consider them and see what maps onto reality as I continue to get more information in. It's all just information among other information. They're all just puzzle pieces. They may not even fit this puzzle, but if they do, then you're a little bit closer to having some understanding of what's happening, while also understanding you're never going to get all the way there. And this is how I conceptualize things in general. I've talked about it in relation to devolution before. I think that what we are all trying to do is gather as many puzzle pieces as we can and begin to put things together, knowing that it's going to be slow and painstaking, and we will not have any idea of what the big picture looks like for a while. But you just put in piece after piece, you understand where they fit, and a picture slowly begins to form. And as it's beginning to form, you don't want to judge what it's ultimately going to be, but you can have a pretty good idea. And if you have to make important life decisions based on that picture, as best you can see it, well, you're definitely going to leave yourself in the best position to make those decisions if you've gotten as much information, as many puzzle pieces as you can, and you have been careful and diligent and discerning about putting them in place. So you know what it is you're looking at. Because we can't know what the future holds, certainly not 100%. We can have strong ideas about what's going to happen on this issue or that, But we can't know everything about everything. I mean, who do you think I am? Klaus Schwab? The only way you can be that confident about the future is if you are creating it yourself. So we will get into some of that craziness. But before we do, let's update on Donald Trump, who over the past few weeks, we were led to believe is broke. And not only broke, but totally screwed. They are going to take all his properties, all of his life's work, the physical proof of his life's work, all of these buildings, these unique, extravagant properties around the world, golf courses, hotels, resorts, historic mansions, skyscrapers. They're going to begin chipping away, just taking chunks of everything that is Donald Trump, just piece by piece, take this man apart. We were told he's broken. All of it was going to come to a climax yesterday, because yesterday was the day that he had to give Peekaboo James nearly $600 million in order to appeal the decision from the corrupt and creepy Judge Engoron, who has already been reversed in that case numerous times and is basing his decision on ridiculous notions like Mar-a-Lago being worth $18 million. So Trump was broke. He was unable to secure a bond because none of the bond companies would issue a bond that large. It was an excessive fine and penalty. It was put in place to make it so that Donald Trump wouldn't be able to appeal. It was a violation of his Eighth Amendment rights under our Constitution. Also represented a First Amendment violation under our Constitution because he is campaigning and his political opponents are making him direct resources for his legal defense rather than getting his message out to the public. Although, of course, when you are Donald Trump, you can get your message out to the public whenever you want, all the time. It doesn't matter how many ways they try to shut him down. He is still the singular voice in the world that is listened to at all times. And while they are trying to shut him down, he is getting his message out on his own platform, Truth Social. The merger of the companies took place on Friday. Today, the company hits the New York Stock Exchange. Now, before that even happened, this is from Bloomberg last night, Trump's net worth hit $6.5 billion, making him one of the world's 500 richest people. Donald Trump's business empire was supposed to be in peril like never before on Monday. Instead, it turned into the single greatest day on record for the former president's wealth, facing a deadline to post a bond of more than $500 million. In a New York fraud lawsuit, a state appeals court tossed him a lifeline, slashing the amount he'd have to post to $175 million, an amount he says he'll cover. And how will he cover it? A reporter asked him that yesterday at the end of one of his public statements. Donald Trump actually posted this as a meme on Truth Social. And if there are kids in the car, apologies for the swear word. I can't take it out. The reporter shouts, "What's your collateral for the bond?" Trump says cash, and then it goes thug life.
What's your collateral for the bond? Cash.
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G.
Snoop Dogg.
You know what happened with the DRE.
Now, I imagine that Biden voters might think that's not presidential, but it's actually hilarious. And the more that the Trump deranged out there go crazy over this and spread it around, the more viral it goes. The more people hear that Donald Trump is just going to pay his bond in cash. $175 million in cash. But also, he's very broke, and he's forcing all of his supporters to pay his legal bills and pay for his campaign. And he's really all doing it for profit and for his ego and to seize political power. That's why he's doing all of this. He's giving up $175 million for this ridiculous prosecution because he's trying to rip off his supporters and he doesn't want to stop campaigning. That's his lifeline to funds, is his supporters. But let's get back to this article. Around the same time as social media company Trump Media and Technology Group wrapped up a 29-month-long merger process, meaning shares worth billions of dollars on paper are now officially Trump's. All told, his net worth increased by more than $4 billion. That means, for the first time ever, Trump joined the ranks of the world's wealthiest 500 people on the Bloomberg Billionaires Index with a fortune of $6.5 billion. We have a great company and are incredibly honored, Eric Trump, executive vice president of the Trump Organization, said in a statement. The article also says, DWAC shares closed at $49.95 Monday, up about 185% since the start of the year. That values Trump's 58% stake in the company at $3.9 billion. So that's the value when the shares are $49.95 each. Trump is reported to have 80 million shares. The current stock price right now, as of this recording, is around $72 per share. So Donald Trump is at about $6 billion worth just of this stock. So by the calculations Bloomberg made for this article yesterday, Trump's net worth is actually about $8.5 billion, not $6.5. Whoops. It's the sort of money that makes you wonder if Trump even knows that he's broke. So Trump is broke. He's lashing out. He's posting these mean memes with swear words and rap songs and sunglasses going down on his face just because he said he was going to pay $175 million in cash. But he's also broke and he's not acting presidential. You know what's presidential? This statement from a spokesman for the illegitimate Biden regime. This is what they released yesterday. This is part of their dark Brandon motif. Joe Biden is very aggressive. He's got a cutting wit. He's taking mean old Donald Trump to the woodshed with his literary prowess and wordsmithery. Here is the statement about Trump's press conference. Donald Trump is weak and desperate, both as a man and a candidate for president. He spent the weekend golfing, the morning comparing himself to Jesus, and the afternoon lying about money he definitely doesn't have. His campaign can't raise money. He is uninterested in campaigning outside his country club, and every time he opens his mouth, he pushes moderate and suburban voters away with his dangerous agenda. America deserves better than a feeble, confused, and tired Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is feeble, confused, and tired. That's the illegitimate president's people speaking on behalf of the illegitimate president, who is actually too weak and feeble and confused and tired to make statements on his own. So his underlings do the big talking that he's not capable of himself. And of course, all his remarks are prepared. All the questions from the reporters are scripted, as are his responses, and they're all just written down on his little card always. And we will hear from Joe Biden in a little bit. He came out today to give about a 3-minute statement on this bridge collapse. And even in the course of those 3 minutes, Joe Biden had one of those famous Joe Biden gaffes where he is just making up what happened in his life. He said that he has traveled over the Francis Scott Key Bridge by car or by train many times. The only problem being that there is no train track on the Francis Scott Key Bridge. There never was. So that just didn't happen. But not because he is tired or confused or feeble. It's because he's just a liar. And so let's talk about this bridge collapse, the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, Maryland. Here is Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was in the Navy, so he has some understanding of ships and shipping routes. This is just something he's interested in and seems to have some knowledge in. Here are some of his comments from this morning on War Room. And there are a couple little hiccups with the audio. It's going to sound like it's going out. It'll come right back in. Apologies for that. There's not a good clip of this that I can find.
But the thing on the bridge is, first off, when you go in and out of harbors, I don't care if it's in Hong Kong, or if you're in Singapore, of which or Tokyo, these ones in Asia and the Middle East that I pulled in and out of Philippines as a young. Big cargo ships, and even sometimes naval vessels, although they hate doing it, you have to take on a pilot. They don't let, if you've seen those massive cargo ships, those cargo ships are under, and until they get to kind of the open ocean or to where Baltimore Harbor gets into the Chesapeake Bay, they have a pilot on board. And people is harbor, and not just under full power. Now you're not going full power, but you have all the boilers, or you have your gas turbines. Everything's up, everything's online. You can on a moment's notice flip, but you also have backup generators. When you're in tight quarters like that, you have backup generators, and the pilots know this. As soon as they come on board, you go through a whole checklist. And I believe the pilots are taken on board right at dockside. They don't come alongside the ship. They come alongside the ship when you're coming in. But when you're leaving, you go up, and that is a standard evolution that you go through. And these pilots have been doing this. These guys are experienced. They're not kids. These are very experienced people. You go through the entire checklist, and you make sure the backup generators are on. So if you in the tight quarters, it's not catastrophic. You can have a catastrophic loss of power, but you immediately have a backup generator that gives you a modicum of steerage and engine power. And here's what I don't get. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm just looking at that chart and looking at the thing. The guy, somehow it turned in right into the bridge, stanchion, or the major part of the bridge. It just makes no sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the pilot has got to be grilled here. It just makes no sense. You have a train, and it was clear night with no wind, because you see the freeboard on that ship, you could get blown over, but it looked like no wind. A beautiful clear night, so there's no fog. And I understand, ships lose power. The backup systems on these things, because remember, to the economics of it, they only have 20 guys on board. And to be brutally frank, a lot of the captains on those ships are not like Lord Horatio Nelson, okay? We used to see them in the open ocean all the time, and hey, they don't follow the rules of the road. You got to move out of the way of them. But when you're in tight quarters in these major industrial ports, right, like coming into New Jersey, that form New York Harbor, or coming into Baltimore, or coming into like Tampa or L.A., San Pedro in L.A., or all the parts in Asia. Europe I'm not familiar with. I didn't sail there. But it just makes... There's something, you had a pilot on board, you had a clear night. Of course, you had a catastrophic loss of power. The lights went down. You can see them try to come back on if you watch the night thing. But the system's got redundancies. It has redundancies specifically for this type of thing happening. And then you got the ability, you could drop an anchor and just stop the thing. You might tear the front of the vessel out, but at least you're not going to take down a bridge. It's something is very suspect about this. And particularly if you look at the chart, if you look at and I think Daily Mail's got it up, somehow they turn toward, the one thing you wouldn't do is turn towards and say, well, they lost power and lost control. Hey, there's a backup generator that's giving it's giving steerage. It's giving your rudders power. And you're telling me you lost main propulsion, you lost all electric, and then you lost the backup? Somebody's got to walk me. Some Admiralty board's got to look at that like immediately, because I ain't buying it. Yeah. I'm not buying it. Systems set up for redundancy and set up for it. So I'm not saying it's terrorism, but these people that jump in is not terrorism right away. Whoa. Let's just get the facts here. This is what I love about the MAGA movement. We ain't buying anything. We want to see the receipts, right? And I'm telling you right now, the receipts on this kind of stink. They doesn't stink to high heaven yet, but there's more questions than answers.
Bannon often says no conspiracies, but no coincidences. And there are a lot of questions about this event. Let's see what the central narrative is telling us. It wants us to believe, and they don't beat around the bush in telling us, hey, this is what we want you to believe. The original headline on this, according to the search results, is what to know about the Baltimore Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. They changed that to what we know about Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. Now, at the top of the article online, they have the video that went viral this morning. That is, we're told, the video of this ship, the Dali, ramming into one of the supports, one of the pillars for this bridge. And that elision, as they call it, the ship turning into and then ramming this support, is what caused the collapse of the bridge. Now, in the video, you can see the lights on the ship go out. They come back on. Black smoke starts billowing out from the ship, and a few seconds later, it smashes into that pillar. So Steve Bannon is talking about how they have all sorts of redundancies built in to make sure that something like this absolutely never happens, especially not in the middle of one of these busy harbors, one of these ports, because so much commerce is conducted there. The harbors and ports are critical infrastructure. We will get into some of that in just a bit, but let's go through the Washington Post here. Let's get the official story. This is what we are supposed to believe about what happened. All of this is information approved by the authoritative source. The Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed around 1:40 a.m. Eastern Time Tuesday after being hit by a cargo ship, with large parts of the bridge falling into the Patapsco River. The Baltimore Fire Department has labeled the incident a mass casualty event. Rescuers were searching for several people, and vehicles were detected in the water. Here's what we know so far. A Singapore-flagged vessel, the 948-foot Dali, crashed into the Key Bridge around 1:30 a.m. Eastern Time, Coast Guard Petty Officer First Class Matthew West said in Baltimore. Singapore's Maritime Port Authority said Tuesday evening local time that it was investigating the collision and providing full cooperation to the U.S. Coast Guard. The authority, which regulates marine services in Singapore, confirmed that a Singapore-registered vessel struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge around 1:30 a.m. Eastern. There were 22 crew members on board during the collision, it said. It is not clear why the collision led to the collapse. Officials said it was too early to provide further details. Ian Firth, a British structural engineer and bridge designer, said in an interview Tuesday that the bridge had a lightweight support structure and appeared to have vessel protection devices in the water around it, but that the objects were not adequate. And I guess that could make some sense. You don't expect one of these vessels to all of a sudden just turn 90 degrees and slam directly into the support for a massive bridge. Baltimore authorities said rescue efforts were still underway Tuesday morning and that they were treating the incident as a potential mass casualty event. There were likely multiple people on the bridge at the time of the collapse, Baltimore Fire Chief James Wallace told a news conference. He said 2 people have been removed from the water so far. One was uninjured, and another was transported to a local trauma center in a very serious condition. Wallace said at least 7 people were in the water. Kevin Cartwright, the Baltimore Fire Department's director of communications, previously told the Washington Post that the number could be as high as 20. Our sonar has detected the presence of vehicles submerged in the water, Wallace said, without giving a number. Wallace said authorities were using subsurface search tools, including sonar and underwater drones, as well as marine and aerial support in the rescue efforts. He added that frigid temperatures at the scene were making conditions difficult for rescuers. And while spring has officially just begun, the Atlantic waters in this inlet cannot be something you find yourself needing to swim your way out of at 1:30 in the morning. That is the stuff that nightmares are made of, so prayers for whoever may have faced that situation last night. The 1.6-mile-long bridge spans the Patapsco River as it runs from Baltimore's Inner Harbor out to the Chesapeake Bay. It carries about 11 million vehicles annually and was opened in 1977, named after Francis Scott Key, composer of the Star-Spangled Banner. According to Wikipedia, Key observed the British bombardment of Fort McHenry in 1814 during the War of 1812. He was inspired upon seeing the American flag still flying over the fort at dawn and wrote the poem Defense of Fort McHenry. It was published within a week with the suggested tune of the popular song To Anacreon in Heaven. The song with Key's lyrics became known as the Star-Spangled Banner and slowly gained in popularity as an unofficial anthem, finally achieving official status more than a century later under President Herbert Hoover as the national anthem. And we may find at some point in the near future that this story actually leads us back in to some study of the War of 1812. I don't know about you, but I often find myself totally relearning history in a way that makes it feel like I'm learning it for the first time, because I know that how it was described when I was in school makes no sense in relation to how I understand the world now. And of course, that's the sort of advantage you get when you are the regime, when you are creating the base of knowledge by which everyone else has to guide their lives. You get told the official story from the point of view of the people who constantly write and rewrite that official story in order to arrange the world as they want it to be arranged. I wrote about this at length on the Substack. It is called The Sides of History, and it's about what it means that history is continually written by the winners. We understand that. We think that makes sense, but then we don't consider what it means to have won, or what it means to be described in the future as though you did win in the past, and how these things can be manipulated and changed over time. Roles can be reversed. Victim and oppressor narratives are reversed. Causes and effects are reversed. And we know the characteristics of the regime in power, the regime writing all of this history, framing our past, present, future for us at all times, and they are not to be trusted. But let's get back into what that very regime wants us to believe about this Baltimore bridge. Hours after the collapse of the key bridge in Baltimore, traffic on area roadways remained moderate. Interstate 695 eastbound and westbound were closed at the bridge, regional traffic officials said, with the outer loop diverted to MD 10 at exit 2 and the inner loop diverted to MD 157 at exit 43. Officials said commuters should use alternate harbor crossings via Interstate 95 and Interstate 895 and be aware of size and hazmat restrictions. The Maryland Department of Transportation posted a list of affected bus routes. Baltimore Harbor was closed to shipping traffic, officials said. So what do we know about the container ship? Singapore's Maritime Authority said there were 22 crew members on board during the collision. Wallace said the crew was believed to still be on the vessel. The cargo ship is about 48 meters wide and 300 meters long and was built in 2015, according to MarineTraffic.com. The container ship was en route to Colombo, Sri Lanka, according to VesselFinder, which tracks global shipping, and had been due to arrive on April 22nd. Before Baltimore, it had called at ports in Norfolk and New York in the United States after traversing the Panama Canal. The registered owner of the ship is Grace Ocean Pte. Limited, and it's managed by Synergy Marine Group. Synergy Group controls a fleet of nearly 400 vessels and employs more than 14,000 seafarers, according to its website. In 2023, a tanker partly managed by Synergy collided with a tanker off the coast of the Philippines, killing 2 seafarers, a Filipino national and a Chinese national, according to Philippine Coast Guard. The headquarters of the Singapore-based Synergy Group was dark when a Post reporter visited Tuesday evening local time. 2 employees who answered the doorbell said the office was closed for the day. No question, said one employee, slowly backing away from the door as his phone rang repeatedly. So that is some real on-the-ground reporting we have in real time in Singapore. Amazing. So let's go back to the video of this quote-unquote accident. The ship, as I said, turns sharply and heads directly into this support. And a lot of people first found out about this incident from a viral post on X, formerly Twitter, by none other than Andrew Tate. He wrote, "This ship was cyber attacked. Lights go off and it deliberately steers toward the bridge supports. Foreign agents of the USA attack digital infrastructures. Nothing is safe. Black Swan event imminent." Now, I don't know what he's trying to claim by this Black Swan event that would be imminent. I don't know how this bridge collapse causes something else unforeseen, something major, a disruption on that scale. And I don't know how Andrew Tate, of all people, would be the guy to know that. But hey, maybe he's right. A community note eventually appeared underneath his post on X, formerly Twitter, that says officials have said it was not intentional nor an act of terrorism. An early cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency report found the container ship lost propulsion and notified Maryland Department of Transportation as it was leaving port. That claim is coming from Maryland Transportation Secretary Paul Wiedefeld. As quoted in the Daily Mail, he said, pilots move ships in and out of the port of Baltimore. Referring to the specialists who come on board to handle that, he said the vessel notified Maryland's Department of Transportation that they had lost control of the vessel and an collision with the bridge was possible. The vessel struck the bridge, causing a complete collapse. The article notes that this same ship, the Dali, was involved in an incident in 2016 in the port of Antwerp when the ship ran into the quay. That is the long structure where the ships dock, essentially. But let's focus back in on the cybersecurity aspects, because we just heard a month or so ago about cybersecurity issues related to our ports, and these articles are quoting CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that agency that reassured us we had the safest and most secure election of all time in 2020. That same agency who has now summarized the J. Alex Halderman report, letting the country know that actually these voting machines are wide open and vulnerable to manipulation. That CISA. Here is the Associated Press from February 21st of this year. Biden is boosting cybersecurity at U.S. ports where online attacks can be more ravaging than storms. What foresight for an enfeebled, tired, confused, old, degenerate man like Joe Biden. President Joe Biden on Wednesday signed an executive order and created a federal rule aimed at better securing the nation's ports from potential cyber attacks. The administration is outlining a set of cybersecurity regulations that port operators must comply with across the country, not unlike standardized safety regulations that seek to prevent injury or damage people and infrastructure. We want to ensure there are similar requirements for cyber when a cyber attack can cause just as much, if not more, damage than a storm or another physical threat, said Ann Neuberger, Deputy National Security Advisor at the White House. Nationwide, ports employ roughly 31 million people and contribute $5.4 trillion to the economy and could be left vulnerable to a ransomware or other brand of cyber attack, Neuberger said. So that is an absolutely enormous part of our economy that relies on these ports. The standardized set of requirements is designed to help protect against that. The new requirements are part of the federal government's focus on modernizing how critical infrastructure, like power grids, ports, and pipelines, are protected as they are increasingly managed and controlled online, often remotely. There is no set of nationwide standards that govern how operators should protect against potential attacks online. The threat continues to grow. Hostile activity in cyberspace, from spying to the planting of malware to infect and disrupt a country's infrastructure, has become a hallmark of modern geopolitical rivalry. For example, in 2021, the operator of the nation's largest fuel pipeline had to temporarily halt operations after it fell victim to a ransomware attack, in which hackers hold a victim's data or device hostage in exchange for money. The company, Colonial Pipeline, paid $4.4 million to a Russia-based hacker group, though Justice Department officials later recovered much of the money. And of course, as we know, whenever there is anything related to a cyber attack, it is Russia's fault or China's fault, and definitely not anyone's fault, not anyone tied to the regime, to the Uniparty. None of it. It's only Russia and China. That's right. Those dastardly Russians shut down an entire pipeline and decided to start it back up for $4.4 million that the DOJ later recovered. If you're going to shut down some critical infrastructure, You got to ask for more than $4.4 million, and then you have to use that money to make sure that they can never catch you and take away your money. $4.4 million, just not getting it done. But back to the article. Ports, too, are vulnerable. In Australia last year, a cyber incident forced one of the country's largest port operators to suspend operations for 3 days. In the U.S., roughly 80% of the giant cranes used to lift and haul cargo off ships onto U.S. docks come from China and are controlled remotely, said Admiral John Vann, commander of the U.S. Coast Guard's Cyber Command. That leaves them vulnerable to attack, he said. Late last month, U.S. officials said they had disrupted a state-backed Chinese effort to plant malware that could be used to damage civilian infrastructure. Vann said this type of potential attack was a concern as officials pushed for new standards, but they are also worried about the possibility for criminal activity. The new standards, which will be subject to a public comment period, will be required for any port operator, and there will be enforcement actions for failing to comply with the standards, though the officials did not outline them. They require port operators to notify authorities when they have been victimized by a cyber attack. The actions also give the Coast Guard, which regulates the nation's ports, the ability to respond to cyber attacks. Now, as many of you know, I am part of Badlands Media. I am on the Devolution Power Hour on Saturday nights in addition to other shows. Badlands also has a Wednesday edition of the Devolution Power Hour. I am not on that one. Burning Bright and Just Human are on that one. And back when this executive order came out, they, along with John Harold, Patel Patriot, analyzed that executive order on the Wednesday DPH. Here is a clip from that show.
Fact sheet: Biden-Harris administration announces initiative to bolster cybersecurity of U.S. ports. Today, the Biden-Harris administration will issue an executive order to bolster the security of the nation's ports alongside a series of additional actions that will strengthen maritime cybersecurity, fortify our supply chains, and strengthen the United States industrial base.
So these are some of the actions. He will sign an executive order to bolster the Department of Homeland Security's authority to directly address maritime cyber threats, including through cybersecurity standards to ensure that American port networks and systems are secure. So this is the part that's concerning, because when you talk cybersecurity and DHS, you're talking about CISA. And then you go and actually look at the executive order.
It's to Coast Guard.
Exactly. So this is Coast Guard, which is under the military.
Yep.
And Biden is now implanting, let me get to it right here. So there was a change from this previously. So it's amending section 6.16-1, which is right here. And this is in the Federal Code of Federal Regulations. If there's any issue, sabotage, subversion, it is to be reported immediately to the FBI and to the captain of the port or to their respective representatives. This new executive order, like I said, embeds cybersecurity. So it's all the same stuff, except after FBI, now it says, shall be reported to the FBI, the cybersecurity or infrastructure security agency for any cyber incident, and then the captain of the port and the respective representatives. And so this got me thinking about what CISA did during the election. Like, they were totally subversive. Everything they did was to benefit the Biden administration, the regime, the elite, whatever you want to call it, the establishment. And now they're being embedded within military nodes. And this is something I think has happened in multiple areas. Then recently we had that story of China and their cyber army invading U.S. critical infrastructure. And part of this was through ports in Hawaii.
Yep.
Among the victims were a water utility in Hawaii, a major West Coast port, and at least one oil and gas pipeline. I'm thinking about this here, and I feel like CISA is the deep state cyber agency, and they're being embedded everywhere.
Now, that is very interesting. The illegitimate Biden administration was moving around various authorities and responsibilities, shifting them and putting them under CISA, which is under DHS. So the Department of Homeland Security and CISA are the new federal authorities to be called in the event of a cybersecurity issue in our ports. This post on X, formerly Twitter, by Laura Logan is also making the rounds today. She writes, multiple intel sources. Baltimore bridge collapse was an absolutely brilliant strategic attack, and that is a quote from one of her sources, on U.S. critical infrastructure, most likely cyber, and our intel agencies know it. In information warfare terms, they just divided the U.S. along the Mason-Dixon line, exactly like the Civil War. Second busiest strategic roadway in the nation for hazardous material, now down for 4 to 5 years, which is how long they say it will take to recover. The bridge was built specifically to move hazardous material, fuel, diesel, propane gas, nitrogen, highly flammable materials, chemicals, and oversized cargo that cannot fit in the tunnels. That supply chain is now crippled. Make no mistake, this was an extraordinary act in terms of planning, timing, and execution. So Lara Logan takes it as a given that this was some sort of attack, and I have to be honest, it would seem shocking for this to be anything other than that. You cannot just say, well, it could be an accident, and then just go with that. And that's one of the problems we kind of have in our modern information culture. We have so many stories all the time, every day, just thousands of stories. Most of them cannot possibly matter to our lives at all, but still we try to learn all of the details, understand what it means, place that somewhere on our map of reality, and try to move forward. We'll have one of these events happen, and we'll start getting into the details, and each one of the details, well, it could go one way or the other. It depends on how you interpret it. It depends on how skeptical you're going to be, how discerning you are. If you see sparks or flames or explosions, does that mean that there was some sort of explosive device placed in a particular spot on the bridge? Or is it just some wire, some electrical device snapping and exploding due to pressure or crashing into something else and sparks fly? Which one is it? Well, we don't know. You see the lights of the ship go out and come back on. What's all that black smoke billowing out? The ship has a bunch of redundancies. Is that being caused by one of those redundancies in response to the lights going out in the first place? The lights come back on. All of a sudden, the ship turns directly into that pillar. Is that related to the ship's systems being disrupted by whatever's going on with the power? Why aren't the redundancies kicking in? Is it human error? Did the guy just turn the wheel way too hard? In the Daily Mail article, some professor somewhere is suggesting, well, it was 1:30 at night, so it could have just been fatigue. And that seems unnecessarily dismissive. You can dismiss each and every one of the aspects of this event. You can say, well, that's probably an accident. That could have just happened in the normal course of things. Maybe there was human error. Maybe there were mistakes made. The power went out. Maybe something was going wrong with the systems in the ship. And of course, it had an inspection last year that said there were problems with the propulsion mechanism. So was it a propulsion issue? Those are the issues reported by this ship, supposedly after it left the harbor. Does that explain the ship turning 90 degrees to head directly into this pillar, this support? I don't know. And they will say, well, if you don't know what the answer is, if you can't evidence each one of these claims, then you have to assume the default that it was all just an accident. Well, wait a second. Why is an accident the default? Because in the other situation, you have to place blame somewhere, and you don't want to place blame anywhere without having ample evidence, something you can prove, because you wouldn't want someone to be blamed if they weren't actually responsible. Well, I get the motivation. That makes total sense. But that motivation doesn't actually have anything to do with the likelihood that it was just an accident or the likelihood that it was intentional. And sadly, we're not able to believe any of the authorities in what they tell us about this incident. So while you might not be able to prove anything in terms of an attack, especially not 14 hours later, there's also no reason to assume as your default position that this is just an accident and that provides enough explanation. Oh, bad things in the world happen. Therefore, this is one of those things. Well, if that's the case, then it's awfully coincidental that an executive order was written to deal with a situation kind of exactly like this just a month ago. But hey, coincidences happen, right? I mean, they do, right? They do, right? Let's get back to Lara Logan. The two critical components on that bridge are the two load-bearing pylons on each end closest to the shore. They are bigger, thicker, and deeper than anything else. These are the anchor points, and they knew that hitting either one of them would be a fatal wound to the integrity of the bridge. And that is a claim for the engineers to deal with. I have seen people suggest a few different things about the structural integrity of this bridge. But let's continue. Half a mile of bridge went into the river. Likely you will have to build a new one. Also caused so much damage to the structural integrity of the bottom concrete part that you cannot see and won't know about until they take the wreckage apart. She opines that the structural destruction is likely absolute. She said the attack was perfectly targeted. They have figured out how to bring us down. As long as you stay away from the teeth of the U.S. military, you can pick the U.S. apart. We are arrogant and ignorant, a lethal combination. Obama said they would fundamentally change America, and they did. We are in a free-fall ride on a roller coaster right now, no brakes, just picking up speed, and that is a quote from one of her sources. The footage shows the cargo ship never got in the approach lane in the channel. You have to be in the channel before you get into that turn. Location was precise and deliberate. Choose a bend in the river where you have to slow down and commit yourself. Once you are committed in that area, there is not enough room to maneuver. Should have had a harbor pilot to pilot the boat. You are not supposed to traverse any obstacles without the harbor pilot. They chose a full moon so they would have maximum tidal shift, rise and fall. Brisk flow in that river on a normal day, and have had a lot of rain recently, so water was already moving along at a good pace. Hit it with enough kinetic energy to knock the load-bearing pylon out from under the highway, which fatally weakens the span, and then 50% of the bridge fell into the water. All these factors, when you look at it, this is how you teach people how to do this type of attack, and there are so few people left in the system who know this. We have a junior varsity team on the field. Tremendous navigational obstruction, huge logistical nightmare to clean this up. Number of dead is tragic, but not the whole measure of the attack. That kind of bridge, constantly under repair, always at night because there is so much traffic and they cannot obstruct that during the day. So concern is for repair guys who were on foot out of their vehicles, who may now be in the water, 48 degrees at most at this time of year. When you choke off Baltimore, you have cut the main north-south hazardous corridor on I-95 in half. Now it has to go around the city or go somewhere else. To move some of that cargo through the tunnel, you may be able to get a permit, but those are slow and require an escort system that is expensive and has to be done at night. For every $100 that goes into the city, $12 comes from shipping. Believe this will cripple the city of Baltimore at a time when they do not have the resources to recover. And of course, they are going to declare a state of emergency there. Federal funds will now flood into Baltimore and into Maryland. And this is kind of what we generally see whenever there is a natural disaster or something like this, but not all the time, not all the time. Remember, they didn't do pretty much anything after the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. And it's certainly true that that is a smaller scale disaster than this one. But with this one, they seem to be absolutely on top of all of it. They already know this isn't a terrorist attack. That is what we are being led to believe by, of course, CISA. So as I said earlier, the fake president came out today to address this. Let's hear what he has to say.
Briefly about the terrible incident and accident that happened in Baltimore this morning. At about 1:30, a container ship struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which I've been over many, many times commuting from the state of Delaware in our train or by car. Been in Baltimore Harbor many times. And the bridge collapsed, sending several people and vehicles into the water, into the river. And multiple U.S. Coast Guard units, which are stationed very nearby, thank God, were immediately deployed along with local emergency personnel. And the Coast Guard is leading the response to the port, where representatives from the Federal Highway Administration, the FBI, the Department of Transportation, the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as Maryland officials and Baltimore Police and Fire, are all working together to coordinate an emergency response. Officials at the scene estimate 8 people were unaccounted for were unaccounted for. That number might change. 2 have been rescued, 1 without injury, 1 in critical condition. And the search and rescue operation is continuing for all those remaining as we speak. I spoke with Governor Moore this morning, as well as the Mayor of Baltimore, the county executive, both United States senators and the congressman. And my Secretary of Transportation is on the scene. I told them we're going to send all the federal resources they need as we respond to this emergency. I mean all the federal resources. And we're going to rebuild that port together. Everything so far indicates that this was a terrible accident. At this time, we have no other indication, no other reason to believe there's any intentional act here. Personnel on board the ship were able to alert the Maryland Department of Transportation that they had lost control of their vessel, as you all know and reported. As a result, local authorities were able to close the bridge to traffic before the bridge was struck, which undoubtedly saved lives. Our prayers are with everyone involved in this terrible accident and all the families, especially those waiting for the news of their loved one right now. I know every minute in that circumstance feels like don't know, it's just terrible. We're incredibly grateful for the brave rescuers who immediately rushed to the scene, and to the people of Baltimore who want to say, we're with you. We're going to stay with you as long as it takes. And like the governor said, you're Maryland tough, you're Baltimore strong, and we're going to get through this together. And I promise we're not leaving. Here's what's happening now. The search and rescue operation is our top priority. Ship traffic in the Port of Baltimore has been suspended until further notice, and we'll that channel before the ship traffic can resume. The Army Corps of Engineers is on the spot and is going to help lead this effort to clear the channel. The Port of Baltimore is one of the nation's largest shipping hubs, and I've been there a number of times as a senator and as a vice president. It handles a record amount of cargo last year. It's also the top port in America for both imports and exports of automobiles and light trucks. Around 850,000 vehicles go through that port every single year, and we're going to get it up and running again as soon as possible. 15,000 jobs depend on that port, and we're going to do everything we can to protect those jobs and help those workers. The bridge is also critical for travel, not just for Baltimore, but for the Northeast Corridor. Over 30,000 vehicles cross the Francis Scott Key Bridge on a daily basis. It's virtually it's one of the most important elements for the economy in the Northeast and the quality of life. My transportation secretary is there now. As I told Governor Moore, I've directed my team to move heaven and earth to reopen the port and rebuild the bridge as soon as humanly possible. And we're going to work hand in hand with the support of Maryland to support Maryland whatever they ask for. We're going to work with our partners in Congress to make sure the state gets the support it needs. It's my intention that the federal government will pay for the entire cost of reconstructing that bridge, and I expect the Congress to support my effort. This is going to take some time. The people of Baltimore can count on us, though, to stick with them at every step of the way until the port is reopened and the bridge is rebuilt. You know, even until this job gets done, not leave until then. So I just want to say God bless everybody who everyone harmed this morning and their families, and may God bless the first responders who many lives. And the reason I'm not going to take a lot of questions, there's remaining issues that are open that we got to determine what's going to happen in terms of mission and the like. But
Do you plan to go to Baltimore, sir? And if so, how quickly?
I do, and as quickly as I can. That's what
You said the federal government's also going to pay for the repairs. Is there any reason to believe that the company behind the ship should be held responsible? And then also, you mentioned...
That could be, but we're not going to wait for that to happen. We're going to pay for it to get the bridge rebuilt and opened.
What did you make of Israel's decision not to attend this meeting this week?
Oh, I don't want to get into that. We'll have plenty of time to talk about Rafah.
You mentioned the...
Now, the reporter there at the end asked about Benjamin Netanyahu canceling an Israel delegation's trip to Washington, D.C. this week after the U.S. abstained from voting at the United Nations. They could have vetoed a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza right now, but they went ahead and abstained from the voting. It passed 14-0, and now we are being told the ceasefire is for Ramadan and nothing else. The U.S. had not been supportive of a ceasefire at all, vetoing it in the past, but now it's okay, I guess, because of Ramadan. Anyway, Biden ignored that. There is one moment of his statement that struck me as really, really odd. Let's listen to it again. Again, maybe it's just one of those coincidences, and maybe it's a really lucky, fortunate coincidence that was helpful in the preservation of human life, and we can all be happy about this coincidence and the quick action and everything else, and there's nothing that we should take from what he says here whatsoever. Have a listen.
Personnel on board the ship were able to alert the Maryland Department of Transportation that they had lost control of their vessel, as you all know and reported. As a result, local authorities were able to close the bridge to traffic before the bridge was struck, which undoubtedly saved lives.
So, as all of the coverage has suggested, the ship left port and almost immediately let them know, hey, we're having problems. We might end up hitting this bridge. And so what they did was shut down traffic on either end so that no one else would go onto that bridge. Now, there were vehicles crossing that bridge visible in the video of the crash that has gone everywhere across the internet. The bridge is 1.6 miles long, so it's possible that they didn't shut it down completely in time and that there were cars who had already passed who did get caught in that collapse. But the authorities, the local authorities, sprung into action, shut down the traffic on either side. Now, the bridge is 1.5 miles long. So at normal driving speeds, you would be on that bridge for about 90 seconds, maybe even less than that in the middle of the night when there's no traffic. As I said, we don't know the timing. This is just one of those points at which we need more information in order to know what to think of any of it. So what do we know? Leaving the facts of the incident aside, we know that the Biden administration plans to direct federal funds to Baltimore, to Maryland. They want to get this bridge fixed as fast as possible. They need to open up this port. Too much commerce is conducted there. Too many jobs. Too much of our economy is dependent on that port and it's functioning. It's got to get reopened as quickly as possible. They're going to divert all sorts of funds there. They have even already sent Pete Buttigieg to handle the situation. The reaction here stands in stark contrast to the situation in East Palestine. Now, you might say this is an election year. They need to look like they are out in front of all these issues, that they're totally in control. They should just let everybody know that, in fact, they're so in control that they planned for something exactly like this a month ago and wrote an executive order for it. Now, he also said that he was going to send all that money there and he expected the Congress to cooperate. So he wants this money appropriated. Congress is going to have to do it. He's going to let them know how much he needs, and then they're going to have to spring to action and get that done. Now, are they going to bring up a bill just to pay for this bridge in Baltimore? No way. That would not be in line with Build Back Better principles. See, what you got to do in Build Back Better is you have a disaster that you definitely didn't cause, but you did plan for. You did plan the response for the disaster. You just didn't cause the disaster. You knew this sort of disaster was going to happen at some time. It would be inevitable. So you have to plan out your response in advance, but you didn't cause the disaster. You just let life happen, knowing that a disaster exactly like you planned for will happen. Just like all the preparation they did for pandemics prior to COVID. Now, they didn't go along with any of that preparation. It turned out the preparation was no good. Their plans were terrible. Their understanding of the problem was terrible. Their response was terrible. Their mitigation steps were all terrible. And you can expect the same thing here, of course, because the point is actually not to fix problems. The point is to implement an agenda. And sometimes you have to cause problems in order for that agenda to be implemented. Otherwise, people won't want you to fix their problems when their problems don't exist. So you just give them a problem, and then they're like, okay, now you can fix it. And that's when the regime steps in and says, we're not just going to fix that problem, we're going to build back better. So eyes on any potential port projects, anything that's been announced and planned within the last few years that had that bridge as some kind of obstacle. Maybe they're intending to modernize that port. Baltimore is certainly on the path to being a smart city. There are all sorts of projects in all of these blue cities around the country that need lots and lots of money. Now, again, I am not sure that's what's going on here, but I am suggesting that those are the sorts of things to pay attention to as this situation develops. Whenever there is a lot of federal money headed somewhere to deal with some brand of disaster, some immediate national emergency, you have to assume there are other things going on there, or else they would be efficiently solving problems around the country when they arose, instead of choosing which ones they're going to devote all their energy and resources to. So is that the case? It's hard to say, but he's going to want this money from Congress, and he's going to expect them to deliver it. And that is the same way they talk about a bunch of other money that they are trying to get Congress to deliver. Primarily funding for the fake foreign proxy wars, Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. They want money for all that. They have not given up. They're going to expect Mike Johnson to get that done, though the Congress is currently on recess. And then they want all the money for their border projects. They're not concerned with sealing up the border, but they do want to expand the surveillance state, and they do need additional resources and personnel to be able to facilitate the global slave trade. So they definitely want money there. Now, often when there are these events that grab the nation's attention, getting everyone, even if temporarily, back on the same page, it's always worth considering whether it's a distraction for something else. And that is not to say that the event itself isn't important. It's just that the focus being projected toward that event is disproportionate to how the response would normally be. And when you have that thought, it's worth thinking about what else might be going on in the world. And today we have plenty of contenders for sure. We have Trump with another gag order. We have Supreme Court arguments on the abortion drug mifepristone. And then we have in the UK a court delaying their decision on Julian Assange's extradition to the United States. So it's possible that maybe people thought that was coming today and some distractions were necessary. Could be the reason for the Diddy thing. I'm not saying it's necessarily true about any of this, but it's always worth considering what is slipping through the cracks. Now, all of these stories are going to require more information. We'll get back into more of it tomorrow, but we'll leave it here today. I will be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening to this episode for free, you can support me and support the show and the work I do by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can do so for as low as $50 a year or $5 a month. Comes out to under $0.25 per episode, and you'll blast right through the paywall for all of the writing. The merch store is www.cancelcouture.com, and you can find everything else by heading to Linktree. Linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. And I'll see you soon out on the range. It's high!